We haven't been formally introduced.
Supergirl is almost at the point where the conversation stops being theory and starts becoming evidence. The review embargo is about to lift, and that means the next big DC test is finally here. The reviews for Supergirl are set to drop on Wednesday, June 24th, only 2 days before the film opens worldwide on Friday, June 26th, and yes, that kind of timing is always going to make people nervous. Film fans have seen this pattern enough times to know the usual suspicion. When a studio waits until the very last minute to let critics weigh in, people immediately assume the studio is not fully confident. Fair or not, that is how the game works now. A late embargo does not automatically mean the movie is in trouble, but it absolutely creates a cloud of doubt around the release. Especially for a blockbuster reportedly carrying a budget north of $200 million. That is not the kind of number you casually hide behind if you do not believe the response will be strong. At the same time, Supergirl is not walking into this conversation empty-handed. The most encouraging thread running through the early chatter is Milly Alcock. Across the rumor mill, test screening whispers, and fan discussion, the one piece of positivity that keeps surfacing is her performance. And honestly, that is the best possible place for this movie to start. Shared universes can survive a lot of problems if the audience connects with the central character. If people leave the theater convinced that Alcock is the definitive Kara-Zor-El for this DC era, that buys the franchise a lot of goodwill. It means the movie does not have to be flawless to matter. It just has to make viewers want to follow this version of Supergirl again. That is more important than some people realize, because this is really Alcock's first full chance to define the character. Her brief appearance in Superman gave the audience a taste, but a cameo is not a movie. A solo film is where an actor gets to build the voice, the pain, the edge, the humor, and the emotional logic of a hero. Kara is not Clark, and this movie seems fully aware of that. If the rumors are accurate and the tone is darker, more serious, and more grounded in the character's own emotional reality, then Supergirl could end up doing something very smart for the DC universe, expanding it without just repeating Superman in a different costume. That alone gives the movie a real chance to stand out if it commits to the differences instead of just borrowing the surface-level iconography. Then there's Jason Momoa's Lobo, which could be one of the film's biggest wild cards. The role has been described in conflicting ways, but the consistent part of the reporting is that Lobo matters. Some say his screen time is limited. Others suggest he has a much bigger footprint in the final act. What seems clear is that he's not just there for a cheap cameo pop. If he really is crucial to the ending, then Supergirl may be using him as more than fan service. That matters because Lobo is exactly the kind of character who can either push a comic book movie into something gleefully chaotic or totally derail its tone if the balance is off. But if Craig Gillespie has really found the right lane for him, Lobo could become the kind of scene-stealing presence that makes the movie feel more dangerous, more unpredictable, and more distinct from the polished sameness that sometimes flattens superhero cinema. Still, the concerns are not hard to see. Visual effects are one of the biggest pressure points in modern franchise filmmaking, and early whispers suggest Supergirl may not completely escape that problem. Some reports claim the movie does not lean as hard as expected into the psychedelic visual possibilities of Women of Tomorrow, which is a little worrying because that source material has such a striking identity on the page. If the film softens or underuses that cosmic weirdness, then it risks losing one of the things that could have made it visually unforgettable. Of course, unfinished test screening VFX do not tell the whole story. Studios polish these films right up to release. But even so, it is one of the few recurring concerns that keeps showing up. And it is hard to ignore when superhero audiences have become brutally unforgiving about anything that looks unfinished or generic. The villain conversation is also a mixed bag. Matthias Schoenaerts as crime should, on paper, be a really strong ingredient. He has the screen presence to make even Quiet Menace feel dangerous. but the reporting around the character is split in a way that makes me think this may become one of the movie's biggest debate points once reviews drop. Some people are calling him threatening and effective. Others are describing him as underdeveloped or less memorable than he should be. That is not a small issue. Comic book films can survive a weak villain if the hero journey is strong enough, but they become much harder to elevate into something special when the central threat feels generic. If Krem turns out to be merely functional, Supergirl may still work. But if he lands as a genuinely imposing force, the whole movie probably rises with him. What may ultimately decide the film's reputation, though, is tone. That is the area where the most interesting early buzz is coming from. According to the chatter, the cinematography is more ambitious than what audiences saw in Superman, and certain action scenes have even been compared to the quarter intensity of Daredevil and the kinetic energy of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. More importantly, the film is said to lean darker and more serious than Superman did. That could be exactly what the DC Universe needs right now. Not a total tonal whiplash, but proof that this franchise can stretch. If Superman established optimism and bright-hearted myth-making, Supergirl may need to establish pain, anger, and survival. A universe only starts to feel real when its heroes do not all emotionally operate on the same frequency. And that is what makes these reviews so important. They are not just going to tell people whether Supergirl is good. They are going to tell people what kind of DC universe this really is. Can it handle tonal variety? Can it introduce a newly who feels essential instead of secondary? Can it juggle cosmic weirdness, heavy emotion, franchise world building, and a massive budget without collapsing under its own weight? Those are much bigger questions than whether the Rotten Tomatoes score ends up fresh or rotten. This movie is carrying the burden of being both a character introduction and a structural stress test. My guess is that the reviews are going to land somewhere in a more divided space than Superman did. But that does not necessarily mean disaster. If Alcock truly delivers, if the emotional core is strong, and if the darker tone feels intentional rather than grim for the sake of grimness, Supergirl could easily become one of those comic book movies that sparks arguments while still earning genuine loyalty. And sometimes, honestly, those are the films that matter more in the long run. Safe approval is nice. Distinct identity is better. Supergirl hits theaters on June 26th, and by June 24th, we should finally have a much clearer picture of whether DC's second theatrical swing is another win or the first real wobble of this new era.